Preach the word, preacher.
I'm going to try. How we see things, how we view the world is of critical importance. I'm sure I'm not the only one to have noticed these people online and on our televisions who seek to view their entire life through the lens of being a victim. And from observation alone, they are among the most miserable people alive, that continue to view themselves in the light of victimhood. How we see the world matters. I can only assume that Esau was absolutely starving. I'm not sure that he came in exaggerating it. I can't imagine that he would sell his birthright just for nothing. I'm pretty sure he saw himself as more than simply a victim. Otherwise, the story becomes even more absurd. But to sell one's entire birthright for a single meal, to reduce it like that. Annie Sullivan, does that name ring a bell? Annie Sullivan in The Miracle Worker, you'll remember, is the woman who's called in by the parents, the exasperated parents of Helen Keller. Helen, you'll remember, was born deaf, blind, and mute, and has all but been abandoned by her parents. And now she lives her existence like some kind of animal. Helen's parents, in a last-ditch effort to communicate with their daughter, call in Annie Sullivan, who immediately starts to bring the girl to heel, insisting upon her certain behaviors that hadn't been expected of her. She starts restricting the movement of the child. Annie tries to take the time to spell out on the child's hand the things that she was experiencing, in the hope that the child would eventually see that the things that she's experiencing and what is being played out on her hand are connected. But of course, she sees none of this. She's blind, she's deaf, she's consequently mute, and so she'll see herself as nothing but a victim. And predictably, she starts to kick and buck against the reins that Annie is placing around her. She believes that Annie, this new torturer who's making her do things she's never done before and behave in ways she's never behaved before, that Annie has arrived to bring her nothing but misery. The breakthrough in the movie happens over dinner. The child, again, has been left, and she resorts to this animal-like behavior, grabbing whatever she can until Annie can stand no more of it. And Annie grabs her from the table and drags her outside to the well, one of those old-fashioned wells where you pump. And she begins pumping water over the child's hand and spelling into her hand, water, water, pump, pump, water, water. And then the moment finally arrives. The child's eyes are opened and the scales fall from her eyes. And she begins to understand that what is coming from the pump and what is happening in her hand are connected. That the things that she is feeling and the experience that she is experiencing has a word, and the word means something. They have communicated. And the miracle, of course, is that Annie has taught this child a way to see the world, to live in the world, and communicate with and be communicated to in that world. Maybe not as clearly as everybody else can see the world, but certainly as clearly as she is able to see the world. Annie's world is now becoming visible to the child. And Helen realizes that her torturer is not her jailer at all. She's her savior. And that she hasn't been trying to confine or restrict her. The opposite is true. By the implementation of the rules and the regulations, she's been freeing her. A little like those of you who have taught your children how to play chess. Of course, as young children, they only want to, they want the pieces to go anywhere they want, and they think that's freedom, to do whatever they want on that board. And when you try to bring in, the knight goes in an L shape, the queen can go diagonally or straight, the king can only go one square, but in every direction. The child resists because they're used to all this chaos, and they think you're trying to confine them, they think you're trying to restrict them, until the day arrives when they realize that the rules that you're bringing in is actually freeing them to play the game. And now they get to experience the game in all its glory. And that you weren't trying to restrict or confine them. You were trying to free them to enjoy the game. The crucifixion, the cross of Christ, among other things, was God dragging the human family to the well. And as we watch, and as we look at the cross, and we meditate upon it, and the meaning of it all begins to sink in, water, water, water. As we sing about the cross, as we pray about the cross, as we look at the cross, water, water. That this event 2,000 years ago, this thing that happened on a hill just outside Jerusalem, is to be the means by which life itself is to be interpreted. That until we understand that these rules of giving and sacrifice and death is actually the path to life, then we'll never understand the world and everything around us. When Jesus says, "When I am lifted up, I will draw all men to myself," he wasn't talking about proximity. He's talking about alignment. He's saying that once men see what happened here, once women understand what went on this hill, then life itself will be opened to view. And they'll be able to live and to give and sacrifice. Jesus said, unless a seed falls to the ground and dies, it remains a single seed. But if it dies, I hope you've experienced this so far, that death and sacrifice and giving is the way to life. If you're familiar at all with any Scottish poetry, I would imagine it would come through our most famous poet, and it would be through the song Auld Lang Syne. Maybe you've sang it every now and then at New Year's. Auld Lang Syne, and some of you might even be old enough. I had a couple of old people one time tell me that they were taught to memorize it as a child, so famous. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be... That was Robbie. Robert Burns. Robbie, we call him Robbie. Another work of Robbie's that I'm pretty sure wouldn't have been anywhere close to your curriculum. And I'm going to say it in old Scots tongue, and see how many of you understand what Robbie said. Are you ready? Ready for this? All right, here goes. O wad some power to give to gaze to see ourselves as others see us, it wad free money a blunder free us and foolish notion. Catch it? You want me to try again? O wad some power to give to gaze to see ourselves as others see us, it wad free money a blunder free us and foolish notion. Oh, America. Has it been so long since you set sail from our bonny shores that you've soon forgot? I need to translate it for you. All right, let me translate. Oh, would some power the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us, it would from many a blunder free us and foolish notions. I said it last night in the RV, and Will says, "What are you saying?" Says, "You'll find out tomorrow." The poem was inspired. Oh, would some power the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us, it would from many a blunder free us. The poem was inspired as Rabbi sat at church one day and noticed the beautiful Jenny sitting right in front of him. And as was the custom of the day, if one could afford such things, Jenny was all dressed up to the nines. But as she sat there right in front of Rabbi, and as Rabbi looked closer, Rabbi could see crawling through her hair a louse. Poor Jenny had lice. In fact, the poem is called To a Louse. And so seeing Jenny sitting there thinking she's all that in a bag of chips, and then seeing the lice crawl through her hair, Rabbi thought, oh, would some power the gift to give us to see ourselves as others see us, it would from many a blunder free us. Rabbi's point is not a subtle point. The picture painted is that while Jenny is sitting there thinking she looks great to everybody, if she could only see herself the way Rabbi could see her, it would free her immediately from all pretensions, all pride. It would remove her swagger and keep her from further embarrassment. Because to see how we see the world matters. Jesus Christ came into the world to make blind men see. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. I am the light under which the world in all its reality is to be clearly understood. I am the language by which man might negotiate or articulate his way through life. I am the full exegesis and living translation of the heart of God. Jesus said, unless I am turned on in your life, you will not be able to understand the world. You will not be able to see it as it really exists. You want to be able to face life and face death with equal courage. I am the light of the world. We must learn to see the world the way Jesus saw it. You want to stop being afraid of the dark? I am the light of the world, says Jesus. You want to be able to see the obstacles in your path way before they arrive, the pitfalls, the holes? I am the light of the world. You want to prevent yourself from the blatant stupidities of reducing your birthright to stew? I am the light of the world. I will be able to be the one who will help you to distinguish what is of value in this life. Walking along the road one day, Jesus said, consider the lilies of the field. They do not labor, they do not spin. Yet I tell you, Solomon in all his glory was not dressed like one of these. If this is how God clothes the grass of the field that's here today and tomorrow thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? As Jesus is walking along the road and he sees people fretting and he sees them anxious and he sees them worried, he's puzzled about all this, and he turns to us and says, why are you so worried? Why are you so anxious? Haven't you seen the lilies? Don't you see them? But that was our problem, right? We did see the lilies. Our problem was all we saw was the flowers. And Jesus said to us, a flower? You think that's what you're looking at? A flower? And we said, what, it isn't a flower? And Jesus said, of course it's a flower, but what does it mean? What does it mean? And we must have looked at him as though he was buttoned up the back and said to him, what do you mean? What does it mean? It's a flower. It doesn't mean anything. And by the time Jesus had finished speaking, those with eyes to see and ears to hear walked away knowing what the lily meant. The lily meant that God loved you and that God cared for you. And not just the lily, but seeing as the lily is the fairest of them all, then it was true of all the flowers. In one single statement, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, Jesus changed the entire landscape and everything that came into view. Now, for those who heard what Jesus said, didn't simply walk along a road with the odd flower, because as they approached and passed the odd flower, knowing what it meant, they walked along a world now where God continually calls out to them, I love you. I love you. I love you. That's a different world to live in. Consider the birds, he said. Oh, great, he's having a go at the birds now. Next, he's going to tell us the birds mean something. And he says, that's right, they do. They expose your fear and your faithlessness. He says, you know they don't sow. You know they don't reap. You know they don't gather into barns, and yet every morning there they are, fat and happy, filling your sky with song without a care in the world. You know you're worth 1,000 of them, and you're the one worrying. These flying musicians doing precisely what God has made them to do. And because they find themselves content with their place in the created order of things and doing it for His glory, Jesus says, your Father feeds them because of that. In fact, not one of them ever falls to the ground without your Father knowing about it. And then pointing to a field covered in nothing but dirt, we said to Jesus, I suppose you're going to tell us that that field's ready for harvest. And everybody laughed until Jesus said, that's exactly right. Your whole problem is 4 months until the harvest. Your whole life is filled with excuses as to why you will not do or will not be the person and people that God is calling you to be. Every time He turns up to try and teach you chess, you're flicking over the knight and you don't want the pawn. You want the pawn to be able to do this. You want the pawn to be able to do that. Consider the birds. They're not worried about the dogs or the snakes or the cats or the giraffes. They're just worried about the birds. They do what they do. And they do it to His glory. They've found themselves in the created order of things. And Jesus says, because of that, your Heavenly Father feeds them. When Jesus points to a fig tree, when He talks about the shaking of the sun and the moon in the context of Jerusalem's destruction, or better still, when Peter does it in Acts chapter 2 with Joel, when everybody's puzzled about what's going on in Acts chapter 2, when the Spirit arrives and all the languages start going out, Peter turns and said, "Why are you so surprised? Joel prophesied about this." And the verse he uses is this: "The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood." When Peter uses those words, clearly on a day where the sun wasn't darkened and the moon had not turned to blood, he's saying that this is the day that Joel spoke about. And if you could see it, if you could see the world as it really is, you would understand what's going on today. On a day when everybody said the sun is shining and the moon is fine, Peter said, "No, they're not." Clearly, Peter had learned from his master, telling us there's a way to view the world, a way to see what is happening and to interpret it correctly. But what can God do? What can God do when or if he's faced with a people who continually reduce their birthright to stew? What can God do with a people who'll take the words of eternal life, the means by which to understand all of it, and reduce it to a book of code and law and a few behavioral exercises? Stew. What is God to do with a people who confess that they clearly see Egypt behind them? They clearly see the slavery is gone, their shackles are gone, that their sin has been washed away, and that they clearly see the promised land in front of them, and yet still insist on filling every day of their wilderness with nothing but whining and moaning and griping and groaning about every triviality that comes our way. We reduce the abundant life that he's given us, and we settle for stew. Oh, would some power the gift to give us to see our lives as God would see us. It would from many a blunder free us. Jesus says you take out money, you think it's a coin with Caesar's face on it. Water. You look over there, you think it's a fisherman casting a net. Water. You think it's a farmer sowing seed. Water. You think the top seats are the best seats. Water. You think the way up is up, the first is first. Water. Trying to drum it into our brains that these things mean things. The world around you means something. And if you'll just see it the way he sees it, the whole world explodes into meaning for you. Jesus Christ didn't arrive to throw a few spiritual puzzles at us, whereby if we could connect the dots or clearly interpret them, we might be able to behave 3% better today than we did yesterday. He came that we might have life and have it in all of its abundance. But to be able to have life in all of its abundance, we must see life in all of its abundance. We must, like him, be able to interpret the world and to read the world, so that as the world clamors around us and as the world preaches its gospel to us, and they build their lives upon the sand of wealth and prosperity, prestige and popularity, we might be the ones that recognize that as special and precious and good as these things might ordinarily be, we're the ones that recognize you're building your life on that. Dear God, a single storm, a market crash, a sexual scandal, a falsified headline, a day at the ballot box, it brings it all crashing to the ground and exposes it instantly for what it is. Everyone, Jesus says, Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice, everyone who begins to see the world as I see it, under the light that I am, is like the wise man who built his house on the rock, and the storms blew, and the winds and the rains came, and that house did not move. Dear God, America, I hope you wake up soon. I really, really do. If not for our own benefit, then for the benefit of the world. Because the drifting of an individual away from that rock, the drifting of a church away from that rock, the drifting of a community away from that rock, the drifting of a nation away from that rock, said Jesus Christ, can only have one outcome. The second a storm big enough to take it out arrives, it's gone. In Ephesians 5, Paul says this: submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated their own body, but he feeds it and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, Paul says, but I am talking about Christ and the church. Man, the amount of sermons I've heard on this, I've lost count, and every single one of them, without exception, preaches a sermon as though Paul was talking about marriage. Marriage in this context is stew. Stew. It's bigger than that, it's deeper than that, and it's richer than that. It's with the church in mind that God even gave us marriage. This is why we who belong to Christ insist upon marriage. This is why Christianity will never surrender the tradition of marriage. This is why we recoil at such ignorant statements. It's only a piece of paper, or it's only a ring. Marriage has everything to do with declaring God's love toward the human family and Christ's love toward the church. These things were always intended to speak way beyond themselves. It's bigger and deeper and richer than us. Look, of course, putting a ring on it means that we're putting our money where our mouth is. Of course, putting a ring on it means an open declaration to the girl, to God, to the world, her and no one else. Of course, putting a ring on it means the ability now to live out the greatest demonstration of love and commitment and dedication and sacrifice that a human being can ever experience. But it's bigger than marriage, it's deeper than marriage, and it's richer than marriage, because in marriage it's God putting his money where his mouth is. It's God saying to his church, her and no one else. It's God now living out through the body and life of his Son the greatest demonstration of love and sacrifice and dedication that anyone could ever live. And we won't surrender marriage Because to settle for less than marriage is for the church to say to the world, Jesus does not love the church. It's bigger than us. It runs deeper than us. Without the ring, it's a roommate. It's common law. Jesus said, without God, it's all common. It's all stew. God offers us the chance to live, to see, to experience this life, even in a fallen world. Even within those parameters, it's still possible to live a life after God and align ourselves with Him. A birthright on offer. A birthright, and we settle for stew. Rock is being offered us and we choose sand. Egypt behind us, the promised land in front of us. And still we fill our lives with every piece of garbage that we know the next storm could take. Jesus arrives and says to us, in the trees and in the rivers, in the fields and the farmers, in the air and in your coins, in your marriages and among your assemblies, children, water, water, water. I'm not trying to restrict you. I'm not trying to confine you. I'm trying to show you the rules of the game so that the entire game opens up to you and you can live. That's the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what you'll have if you turn His light on. Oh, would some power, the gift to give us, to see ourselves as God does see us, it would from many a blunder free us.